Princess Zarathel of the Kethmoran Empire stared at the reflection in her crystalline mirror, her violet scales shimmering with nervous energy. Today marked the end of her freedom and the beginning of what she considered a diplomatic sacrifice. The marriage contract lay on her ornate desk, sealed with the crimson wax of both empires, hers and that of the strange bipedal species called humans. The war had raged for 7 cycles, devastating entire star systems and claiming millions of lives on both sides. The Kethmoran military, despite their advanced technology and superior numbers, had been shocked by human tenacity. These creatures, barely out of their home system, fought with a fury that defied all tactical analysis. When they should have surrendered, they attacked. When they should have fled, they held their ground. When they should have died, they somehow survived. Zarathel's father, Emperor Vashtok, had finally agreed to a ceasefire after the humans demonstrated something that chilled even the most battle-hardened Kethmoran generals. At the Battle of Kepler Station, a single human cruiser, its hull breached and engines failing, had rammed directly into the flagship of Admiral Torvex. The explosion had vaporized both ships instantly, but the human captain's final transmission still echoed through military channels. "Tell your emperor the humans don't know how to quit." The peace treaty demanded a marriage between the royal houses. Zarathel, being the emperor's only daughter, was the obvious choice. The humans had selected someone called Marcus Chun, described in the files as a decorated war hero and tactical genius. The princess had studied his military record with growing unease. This human had somehow turned impossible defeats into victories, using strategies that bordered on suicidal. "Your Highness," came a voice from behind her chamber doors. "The human delegation has arrived." Zarathel smoothed her ceremonial robes and walked toward the throne room. The corridors of the imperial palace stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of her ancestors who had conquered dozens of worlds. None of them had ever married an alien species. She would be the first and possibly the last if this alliance failed. The massive doors to the throne room groaned open, revealing the assembled court. Hundreds of Kethmoran nobles filled the space, their scales glittering in the light of floating crystals. At the far end sat her father on the eternal throne, his massive frame draped in robes of office. But Zarathel's attention immediately focused on the small group standing before the throne. The human delegation consisted of only 5 individuals, tiny compared to the towering Kethmoran forms around them. They wore simple dark uniforms with no visible weapons, yet somehow they commanded attention. The nobles whispered among themselves, studying these strange creatures who had fought their empire to a standstill. One human stepped forward. He was tall by his species standards, with dark hair and intense brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room. His face bore several scars, including one that ran from his left temple to his jaw. This had to be Marcus Chun. "Your Imperial Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. He performed what Zarathel assumed was a human gesture of respect, placing his right hand over his heart and bowing slightly. "I am Admiral Marcus Chun of the Terran Federation. I come seeking peace between our peoples." Emperor Vashtok leaned forward, his golden eyes studying the human with curiosity. "Admiral Chun, your reputation precedes you. My military advisors speak of your unconventional tactics. War requires adaptation, Your Majesty. Your empire taught us that survival sometimes demands the impossible." The Emperor's mandibles clicked in what passed for Kethmoran amusement. "Indeed, you humans have proven most educational. Tell me, Admiral, are you prepared to honor the terms of our agreement?" Marcus's gaze shifted briefly to Zarathel, who felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness under his scrutiny. "I am, Your Majesty. The marriage alliance represents our commitment to lasting peace." "Very well." The Emperor rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. Princess Zarathel stepped forward. Zarathel moved with practiced grace, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her. As she approached Marcus, she noticed details the military files hadn't mentioned. His uniform was immaculate despite showing signs of wear. His hands bore small scars, evidence of personal combat experience. Most surprisingly, his eyes showed neither fear nor arrogance as he looked upon the assembled alien nobility. "Princess," Marcus said softly, offering another slight bow. "I hope our union brings the peace both our peoples deserve." "As do I, Admiral," Zarathel replied formally, though something in his tone suggested sincerity rather than mere diplomatic necessity. The ceremony that followed was a blend of both cultures' traditions. Kethmoran priests chanted in ancient tongues while human representatives spoke vows of alliance. Zarathel found herself stealing glances at her new husband throughout the proceedings. He stood with military bearing, responding to each ritual with respectful attention despite their alien nature. When the final blessing was pronounced, Marcus was officially a prince of the Kethmoran Empire, and Zarathel was bound to a species she barely understood. The crowd erupted in polite applause, but she could sense the underlying tension. Many nobles viewed this alliance as weakness, a surrender to an inferior species. As they left the throne room together, Zarathel whispered, "You seem remarkably calm for someone who just married into an alien royal family." Marcus glanced at her with what might have been amusement. "Your Highness, I've been shot at by plasma cannons and boarded exploding space stations. A wedding ceremony, even an alien one, doesn't rate high on my stress scale." Despite herself, Zarathel felt her mandibles twitch in the Kethmoran equivalent of a smile. "Perhaps this arrangement won't be entirely unbearable." "I certainly hope not, Princess. We're going to be stuck with each other for quite some time." The reception lasted hours, with nobles from across the empire offering congratulations that ranged from genuine to barely concealed hostility. Zarathel watched Marcus navigate the complex social dynamics with surprising skill. He seemed to intuitively understand which nobles were allies and which were potential threats, responding to each with appropriate diplomatic courtesy. During a brief lull in the festivities, General Mordak, one of the Emperor's most trusted military advisors, approached them. His scarred hide and missing left arm testified to decades of combat experience. "Admiral Chun," Mordak rumbled, his voice carrying barely restrained aggression. "I confess curiosity about human military doctrine. Your tactics during the war were unprecedented." "General," Marcus replied calmly, "I'd be happy to discuss strategic theory sometime. Perhaps we could arrange a private meeting." "Indeed." Mordak's eyes narrowed. "I'm particularly interested in your decisions at the Rigel offensive. Your fleet was outnumbered 3-1, yet you achieved complete tactical victory." Zarathel sensed the challenge in the general's words. Several nearby nobles had stopped their conversations to listen. This was more than casual interest, it was a test. Marcus appeared to consider his response carefully. "The Rigel operation succeeded because we understood something fundamental about warfare, General. Numbers matter, but they're not everything. Your forces were superior in every measurable way, but you made one critical mistake." "And what was that?" Mordak's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You assumed we would fight like rational beings." The silence that followed was deafening. Several nobles exchanged glances, uncertain whether they'd just witnessed an insult or a profound strategic insight. "Expithen, Murdoch demanded." Marcus stepped closer to the general, showing no sign of intimidation despite the massive size difference. "Your empire has conquered dozens of worlds using overwhelming force and superior technology. Your enemies always eventually recognized their hopeless position and surrendered. You've forgotten how to fight opponents who refuse to accept defeat. And humans refuse to accept defeat. General, humanity spent most of its history fighting itself. We've perfected the art of warfare against opponents who think exactly like us. When you attacked our colonies, you weren't just fighting human military forces. You were fighting a species that had survived 10,000 years of constant conflict." Zarathel found herself fascinated despite her training to remain diplomatically neutral. Marcus spoke with the certainty of someone who had lived through the experiences he described. At Rigel, Marcus continued, "Your fleet deployed in perfect formation, following established doctrine. You assumed we would attempt to withdraw when faced with impossible odds. Instead, we split our forces and attacked from 6 different vectors simultaneously. Half our ships were destroyed in the first hour, but we crippled your command structure and eliminated your tactical advantages." General Mordak's mandibles clicked slowly. "You sacrificed half your fleet for a temporary advantage. I sacrificed half my fleet to win the battle. Your forces spent the next 3 hours trying to re-establish formation instead of pressing their numerical superiority. By the time you adapted, we'd already achieved our objectives. And the cost in human lives?" Marcus's expression hardened. "War always costs lives, General. The question is whether those lives purchase something worthwhile. At Rigel, they bought us 6 months to fortify the Centauri system. Without that time, Earth itself might have fallen." The assembled nobles murmured among themselves. Some seemed impressed by the human strategic thinking, while others appeared disturbed by his casual acceptance of massive casualties. "You speak of sacrifice very easily, Admiral," one of the younger nobles interjected. "Do human lives mean so little to your kind?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Zarathel saw Marcus's jaw tighten, and for a moment she glimpsed something dangerous in his eyes. "Lord Kethvar," Marcus said quietly, "human lives mean everything to our kind. That's precisely why we fight so hard to protect them. Every soldier who died at Rigel knew they were buying time for their families, their friends, their entire species. They chose to die so others could live." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles. Perhaps that concept is foreign to a species that has always held overwhelming advantages in their conflicts. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Lord Kethvar's scales flushed red with anger, but before he could respond, Emperor Vashtok's voice boomed across the chamber. "Enough. This is a celebration of peace, not a military symposium. Admiral Chun, you will have ample opportunity to share your strategic insights with our military staff in the coming days." Marcus bowed respectfully. "Of course, Your Majesty. I apologize if my comments seemed inappropriate for the occasion." As the crowd gradually returned to their conversations, Zarathel studied her new husband with growing interest. In the space of a few minutes, he had demonstrated tactical brilliance, diplomatic skill, and enough backbone to challenge Kethmoran nobility without crossing the line into outright disrespect. "That was well handled," she murmured as they moved toward the refreshment tables. "Was it? I wasn't sure about the social protocols. Human diplomatic training doesn't cover alien wedding receptions. You managed to impress some nobles and intimidate others without directly offending anyone. For someone with no alien diplomatic training, that's remarkably sophisticated." Marcus selected something that looked vaguely edible from the array of Kethmoran delicacies. "Princess, I spent my military career dealing with politicians, military bureaucrats, and interstellar corporations. Compared to that, alien nobles are refreshingly straightforward in their motivations. And what do you think our motivations are?" He turned to look at her directly, his brown eyes meeting her violet ones. "Right now, most of your nobles want to see if the primitive human will embarrass himself and provide justification for ending this alliance. A few are genuinely curious about human capabilities, and you're trying to figure out whether I'm going to be a political asset or a liability." Zarathel felt her scales shift color slightly, an involuntary sign of surprise among her people. "You read the situation very quickly. Pattern recognition is essential in both warfare and politics. The fundamentals don't change much between species. And what patterns do you see here?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, apparently considering his response. "Your empire is strong, but it's never faced an enemy that couldn't be defeated through conventional means. The war with humanity has shaken your military's confidence, and created political instability. This marriage alliance is meant to secure peace, but it's also a test. A test of what? Whether humans can be integrated into Kethmoran society, or whether we're too alien to coexist. Your father is gambling that close contact will create understanding. Your military leaders think proximity will reveal weaknesses they can exploit. The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling. Zarathel realized that Marcus had analyzed the political landscape of her empire in just a few hours with remarkable precision. You seem to have given this considerable thought, Admiral. Princess, when you're planning to spend the rest of your life somewhere, it pays to understand the local politics. The rest of the evening passed without incident, though Zarathel noticed how carefully Marcus navigated each social interaction. He spoke with respect to senior nobles, showed appropriate interest in cultural discussions, and somehow managed to avoid the conversational traps that several hostile nobles attempted to set. As the reception finally wound down, they found themselves walking together through the palace corridors toward the royal quarters. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward, though Zarathel felt the weight of unasked questions. "Admiral," she began, then stopped. "I suppose I should call you something other than your rank now." "Marcus is fine. We're married, after all, even if it was arranged for political reasons." "Marcus, then?" "I find myself curious about something. During the war, you had opportunities to inflict massive damage on civilian targets. Our intelligence reports confirm that human forces deliberately avoided population centers, even when it would have provided tactical advantages." "What?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Because wars end, Princess. When they do, someone has to live with the choices that were made. Humanity learned long ago that the methods you use to win a war determine the kind of peace you'll have afterward. Many species would say that principle is a luxury for those who can afford to be merciful. Maybe, but I've seen what happens when you abandon those principles. During our early space expansion, human colonies fought several brutal conflicts with pirates and raiders. The colonies that used similar brutal tactics eventually became indistinguishable from the enemies they defeated. The ones that maintained their principles, even at greater cost, built lasting peace." They resumed walking, and Zarathel found herself reconsidering her assumptions about human nature. The military files had emphasized their ferocity and tactical unpredictability, but they hadn't mentioned this philosophical restraint. "Your people intrigue me," she admitted. "Your military reputation suggests savagery, yet you speak of principles and restraint. Humans are complicated, Princess. We're capable of incredible violence when threatened, but we're also capable of remarkable compassion. Sometimes those traits seem contradictory, but they're actually complementary. We fight harder when we're defending something we truly believe in." They reached the intersection where their quarters diverged. The marriage contract had specified separate living spaces initially, allowing both parties to adjust gradually to their new circumstances. "I suppose this is where we part ways for the evening," Zarathel said. "I suppose so. Thank you for helping me navigate tonight's social complexities. I suspect I would have committed several diplomatic blunders without your guidance. You handled yourself admirably, though I suspect tomorrow will bring greater challenges." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. "Princess, I've been preparing for challenges my entire life. Whatever tomorrow brings, we'll face it together." As she watched him walk toward his quarters, Zarathel reflected on the day's events. She had entered this arrangement expecting to endure a necessary sacrifice for the good of the Empire. Instead, she found herself partnered with someone who might actually prove to be an asset. The real test, she knew, would come when they faced their first genuine crisis together. In war, Marcus Chun had proven himself exceptional. In peace, surrounded by alien politics and conflicting interests, his true character would emerge. What she didn't yet realize was that the greatest challenges lay not in the complexities of palace intrigue, but in the fundamental differences between human and Kethmoran concepts of duty, honor, and sacrifice. The war had ended, but the real battle for understanding was just beginning. In his quarters, Marcus stood at the window overlooking the imperial capital. Millions of lights stretched to the horizon, representing a civilization that had conquered dozens of worlds. Tomorrow, he would begin the delicate process of finding his place within it. He had told Princess Zarathel the truth about human principles, but he hadn't mentioned the corollary that every human military leader understood. Those principles only applied as long as humanity's survival wasn't at stake. If this alliance failed, if war resumed, he would do whatever was necessary to protect his people. For now, though, peace offered opportunities that war never could. If humans and Kethmorans could truly learn to coexist, both species would benefit. Marcus had fought enough wars to appreciate the value of that possibility. The future would bring tests he couldn't yet imagine, but tonight he allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The princess had shown both intelligence and fairness. Her father seemed genuinely committed to peace. The military leadership remained suspicious, but hadn't shown overt hostility. It was a foundation to build upon. Whether that foundation would support lasting peace or merely delay the next conflict would depend on choices yet to be made by both species. As sleep finally claimed him, Marcus's dreams were filled with visions of human and Kethmoran ships flying together among the stars, exploring new worlds instead of destroying them. It was a beautiful dream, and one worth fighting for 3 months into the marriage alliance. The first real test came not from external enemies, but from within the Empire itself. Zarathel had begun to understand her human husband better through their daily interactions, finding him to be thoughtful, strategic, and surprisingly adaptable to Kethmoran customs. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly he would identify and address problems that the Imperial Court had ignored for years. The morning started like any other, with Marcus joining her for breakfast in the garden pavilion overlooking the capital. He had developed a taste for certain Kethmoran fruits and had learned to use their eating implements with reasonable skill. More importantly, he had begun to understand the subtle social signals that govern palace life. The trade delegation from the Outer Rim territories arrives today, Zarathel mentioned as she reviewed the day's schedule on her data tablet. Father wants us both present for the initial reception. Marcus nodded while examining what appeared to be a cross between a pear and a crystalline structure. The ones from the mining worlds? I've been reading about their grievances. Reading about them where? Zarathel looked up with interest. Marcus had shown a remarkable appetite for information about every aspect of the Empire, but his sources sometimes surprised her. Your palace archives are surprisingly comprehensive. I've also been corresponding with some of the junior military officers who've served in the Outer Rim. Their perspectives are illuminating. Something in his tone caught her attention. What kind of illuminating? Marcus set down his fruit and met her gaze directly. Princess, how much do you know about the actual conditions in the Outer Rim mining colonies? They provide essential resources for the Empire. The territories have local governors who handle administrative matters. Occasionally, they petition for reduced tax obligations or increased infrastructure support. She recited the standard information she'd learned in her diplomatic education. Have you ever visited any of these colonies? No, there's never been a need for royal visits to the mining worlds. Marcus was quiet for a moment, apparently choosing his words carefully. Zarathel, I think you should know what I've learned before we meet with their delegation today. The use of her personal name instead of her title indicated the seriousness of what he was about to say. Over the past months, he had developed an uncanny ability to shift between formal diplomatic language and personal conversation depending on the situation. The mining colonies are suffering from what can only be described as systematic exploitation. The local governors, appointed by the imperial bureaucracy, have been extracting resources far beyond the agreed quotas while providing minimal compensation to the workers. Living conditions are deteriorating, medical supplies are inadequate, and the promised infrastructure improvements haven't materialized in over 2 decades. Zarathel felt her scales shift to a pale blue, a sign of confusion among her people. That's impossible. The governors submit detailed reports every quarter. Father reviews them personally. The reports are fabricated. I've cross-referenced the claimed production figures with the actual resource shipments arriving at Imperial processing facilities. The discrepancies are enormous. Someone has been skimming massive amounts of rare minerals and selling them through private channels. That's a serious accusation, Marcus. Do you have proof? Marcus pulled out his own data tablet and activated a holographic display. Columns of figures appeared in the air between them, showing shipping manifests, production reports, and financial records. I've been working with a team of human analysts that my government sent as part of the cultural exchange program. They specialize in economic forensics, detecting fraud and corruption in complex systems. What they found is systematic embezzlement on a scale that threatens the stability of the entire Outer Rim. Zarathel studied the data with growing alarm. The discrepancies were indeed enormous, representing millions of credits in stolen resources. How did our Imperial auditors miss this? They didn't miss it. Some of them are involved. The accusation hung in the air between them like a physical presence. If Marcus was correct, it meant that corruption had infected the highest levels of Imperial administration. It also meant that the trade delegation arriving today wasn't coming to negotiate. They were coming to deliver an ultimatum. What exactly are you suggesting we do about this? Zarathel asked. That depends on what you want to achieve. If you want to maintain the status quo and hope the problem resolves itself, we can treat today's meeting as a routine diplomatic exchange. If you want to actually solve the underlying issues, we need to be prepared for a much more complicated conversation. Zarathel found herself facing the kind of decision that would define her role as both princess and as Marcus's partner. The safe choice would be to defer to established protocols and let her father's advisors handle the situation. The risky choice would be to trust Marcus's analysis and take direct action. Assuming you're correct about the corruption, what would solving it require? Complete restructuring of the colonial administration, criminal prosecution of the officials involved, massive infrastructure investment to repair decades of neglect, and probably some form of reparations to the affected populations. That would be politically explosive. Many noble families have financial interests connected to the colonial governments. Marcus nodded grimly. I know, but the alternative is worse. If this corruption continues, the Outer Rim territories will eventually revolt. When they do, it won't be a polite request for better governance. It'll be open rebellion. How can you be so certain? Because I've seen it before. Human history is full of examples of oppressed populations reaching their breaking point. The pattern is always the same: years of growing exploitation, followed by failed attempts at peaceful reform, followed by violent uprising. Your mining colonies are currently in the second stage. Zarathel realized that this conversation represented a fundamental shift in their relationship. For 3 months, Marcus had been adapting to Kethmoran society, learning their customs, and finding his place within the existing system. Now he was challenging that system and asking her to choose between loyalty to the established order and loyalty to the principles of justice. If we pursue this course of action, we'll be making powerful enemies within our own government. Yes, but we'll also be preventing a war that could tear the empire apart. A soft chime indicated that palace staff were approaching. Zarathel quickly deactivated the holographic display as her personal aide entered the garden. Your Highness, the trade delegation from the Outer Rim has requested an immediate audience with you and Prince Marcus. They claim to have urgent matters to discuss before the formal reception. Zarathel exchanged glances with Marcus. How immediate. They're waiting in the blue reception chamber now, Your Highness. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the meeting, Marcus spoke quietly. Whatever they're about to tell us, it's probably worse than what I've already discovered. Delegations don't request emergency meetings to discuss routine trade agreements. The Blue Reception Chamber was one of the smaller formal meeting spaces designed for private diplomatic conversations. When they entered, Zarathel saw 5 Kethmorans in the simple clothing of the working colonies. Their scales bore the distinctive patterns of the outer rim subspecies, adapted to the harsh conditions of the mining worlds. The leader of the delegation, an elderly female with scars covering half her face, stood as they entered. "Your Highness, Your Grace, thank you for seeing us on short notice." Delegate Vexera Zarathel recognized the woman from intelligence briefings. "Please be seated. What urgent matter brings you here ahead of schedule?" Vexera glanced at her companions before speaking. "Your Highness, we bring news of a crisis that threatens to destabilize the entire Outer Rim. 3 days ago, the workers at the Kepler 7 mining facility declared a general strike. The situation has escalated rapidly." "A labor dispute? Surely the local governor can address such matters." "The governor is dead, Your Highness, along with most of his administrative staff." The silence that followed was deafening. Zarathel felt her blood chill as the implications sank in. Killed during the strike? Killed before the strike? The workers discovered evidence of massive corruption and confronted Governor Maltok. When he attempted to flee with stolen funds, they prevented his escape. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "What kind of evidence?" Vexera activated a portable data projector, filling the air with financial records and shipping manifests. Years of falsified reports, skimmed resources, and diverted supplies. The medical shipments that were supposed to reach our colonies were sold to private buyers. The infrastructure materials that were supposed to build new housing were redirected to personal construction projects for the governor's family. Zarathel studied the data with growing horror. The scope of the theft was even worse than Marcus had indicated. "How many colonies are affected?" "All of them, Your Highness." "The corruption network spans the entire Outer Rim administrative structure. We estimate that over the past decade, nearly 60% of our resources have been stolen. And the current situation at Kepler 7? The workers have taken control of the mining facilities and are refusing to resume production until Imperial investigators arrive to address the corruption. Similar strikes are being organized at 12 other colonies." Marcus spoke carefully. "Delegate Vexera, what are your people's demands?" "Justice for the murdered colonists who died due to inadequate medical supplies. Prosecution of the corrupt officials. Restoration of the stolen resources. And fundamental reform of the colonial administration to prevent future exploitation." "And if these demands aren't met?" Vexera's expression hardened. "Then we will declare independence from the Kethmoran Empire and seek recognition from other galactic powers." The threat was explicit and devastating. The Outer Rim territories produced nearly 40% of the rare minerals essential for Imperial technology. Losing them would cripple the Empire's economy and potentially invite intervention from rival powers. Zarathel realized that Marcus had been absolutely correct in his assessment. The situation had already progressed beyond peaceful reform. The only question now was whether the Empire would address the corruption or face open rebellion. "Delegate Vexera, I need you to understand that what you're describing represents a fundamental challenge to Imperial authority. The response from the military leadership may be severe. Your Highness, our people have endured severe conditions for decades while their resources were stolen, and their children died from preventable diseases. We have nothing left to lose." Marcus stood and moved to the data display, studying the financial records with obvious familiarity. These shipping manifests showed diversions to private accounts controlled by Governor Maltok and 17 other officials. The total value of the stolen resources exceeds the annual military budget for 3 sector fleets. "You understand our data systems?" Vexera looked surprised. "I've been investigating similar irregularities as part of my integration into Imperial administration. My analysis confirms everything you've presented here." Zarathel saw the pieces falling into place. Marcus hadn't just been reading about colonial problems. He had been building a comprehensive case for reform. Now circumstances had forced the issue into the open. "What do you recommend we do?" she asked him directly. "We have 2 choices. We can treat this as a security matter and send military forces to suppress the strikes, which will almost certainly trigger the independence movement. or we can treat it as a criminal matter and send imperial investigators to prosecute the corrupt officials while implementing immediate reforms. The noble families with interests in the colonial administration will oppose any investigation that threatens their financial arrangements, Zarathel pointed out. Then, they'll have to choose between their financial arrangements and the survival of the empire. Vexera looked between them with obvious interest. Your Grace, are you suggesting that the imperial family might support our demands for justice? Marcus glanced at Zarathel before responding. I'm suggesting that justice and imperial stability happen to align in this case. Delegate Vexera, if Princess Zarathel and I were to personally guarantee a full investigation and immediate reform of the colonial administration, would your people be willing to resume production while that investigation proceeds? That would depend on the specifics of your guarantee. Zarathel realized that Marcus had maneuvered the conversation to a point where she had to make a choice. She could either support his approach and risk political conflict within the empire, or she could default to established protocols and risk losing the Outer Rim entirely. Delegate Vexera, she said slowly, Prince Marcus, and I will personally oversee the investigation into colonial administration. We guarantee that corrupt officials will face prosecution regardless of their political connections, that stolen resources will be restored to the colonies, and that colonial administration will be fundamentally reformed to prevent future exploitation. The words seemed to echo in the chamber with the weight of an imperial decree. Zarathel had just committed herself and the royal house to a course of action that would make powerful enemies within the empire. Furthermore, Marcus added, we request that you and your delegation remain in the capital as official advisors during this investigation. Your testimony and evidence will be essential for identifying the full scope of the corruption. Vexera conferred quietly with her companions before responding. Your Highness, Your Grace, we accept your guarantee. We will send word to the colonies that production should resume pending the results of your investigation. But we will also make it clear that independence remains an option if the promised reforms fail to materialize. Understood, Zarathel replied. Now, if you'll excuse us, Prince Marcus, and I need to brief the Emperor on this situation before the formal reception. As the delegation departed, Zarathel found herself alone with Marcus in the chamber. The magnitude of what they had just committed to was beginning to sink in. You realize what we've just done? She asked. We've chosen to solve a problem instead of ignoring it. That's going to make us unpopular with people who profit from the status quo. It's going to make us targets. Marcus, some of the families involved in colonial administration are among the most powerful in the empire. Marcus moved closer to her, his expression serious but calm. Zarathel, during the war between our peoples, I learned something important about making difficult decisions. The consequences of action are often severe, but the consequences of inaction are usually worse. And if we're wrong? If the political cost of this investigation destroys our ability to implement meaningful reforms, then we'll adapt and find another approach. But we can't let fear of political consequences prevent us from addressing systematic injustice. Zarathel studied her husband's face, seeing the determination that had made him a successful military commander. She realized that somewhere during their 3 months of marriage, he had stopped being just a diplomatic necessity and had become a true partner. Very well. Let's go explain to my father why we've just committed the royal house to the most politically dangerous investigation in imperial history. As they walked toward the emperor's private study, Marcus spoke quietly. For what it's worth, I think we made the right choice. Your people in the Outer Rim deserve justice, and your empire deserve the truth. I hope you're right, because if this investigation fails, it won't just be our political careers that are destroyed. It could be the beginning of a civil war that tears the empire apart. Then, we'll make sure it succeeds. The confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Zarathel knew that the coming weeks would test both their partnership and their principles. They had chosen to stand for justice over political convenience, but That choice would have consequences that neither of them could fully anticipate. What she didn't yet know was that Marcus had been preparing for this moment since their wedding day. His investigation into colonial corruption was just the beginning of a much larger plan to transform the Kethmoran Empire from within. The mild-mannered human who had married her for diplomatic reasons was about to reveal capabilities that would shock both allies and enemies. The real test of their alliance was just beginning 6 weeks after the colonial crisis began. Marcus Chun had transformed from a diplomatic curiosity into the most feared investigator in the empire. What started as a simple audit of mining colony finances had expanded into a comprehensive examination of imperial corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Zarathel watched her husband work with a mixture of admiration and concern as he systematically dismantled criminal networks that had operated with impunity for decades. The war room that Marcus had established in the east wing of the palace resembled nothing so much as a human military command center. Holographic displays showed financial networks, shipping routes, and communication patterns spanning dozens of star systems. Teams of investigators, both human and Kethmoran, worked around the clock analyzing data and tracking leads. The pattern is consistent across all 17 colonial governors, Marcus explained to the assembled investigation team. Inflated production reports, diverted shipments, falsified medical and infrastructure expenditures, and personal accounts in offshore financial centers. Zarathel studied the network analysis floating above the conference table. The scale is staggering. How did they coordinate this level of systematic theft without detection? They had help from within the imperial bureaucracy, replied Dr. Sarah Kim, Marcus's chief financial analyst. Someone with access to the central auditing systems was altering the oversight reports before they reached imperial leadership. Do we know who? Marcus activated a new display showing the imperial administrative hierarchy. Several names were highlighted in red. We've identified 12 officials in the central auditing department who were involved. But the real surprise is who was coordinating their activities. The display zoomed in on a single name that made Zarathel's scale shift to pale silver with shock. Minister Cole Vash, her father's chief economic advisor, and one of the most trusted members of the Imperial Council. That's impossible, she whispered. Cole Vash has served the Empire for over 40 years. He's been like a second father to me. Marcus's expression was grim, but sympathetic. I know this is difficult, Zarathel, but the evidence is conclusive. Cole Vash wasn't just aware of the colonial embezzlement. He was organizing it. The private accounts receiving the stolen resources can be traced directly back to his family's financial network. Dr. Kim activated additional displays showing the money trail. Minister Cole Vash has been systematically looting the empire for at least 2 decades. His personal wealth exceeds the annual budget of most sector governments. Zarathel sank into her chair as the implications crashed over her. If Cole Vash was involved, it meant the corruption had infected the Emperor's inner circle. It also meant that bringing him to justice would require confronting her father with evidence of his closest advisor's betrayal. There's more, Marcus said quietly. Cole Vash wasn't working alone among the council members. The display expanded to show connections to 3 other ministerial-level positions: defense procurement, infrastructure development, and colonial administration. Nearly half the imperial government was compromised. How deep does this go? Zarathel asked. We're still mapping the full network, but preliminary analysis suggests that systematic corruption has been affecting imperial policy for at least 25 years. Decisions about military spending, infrastructure investment, and resource allocation have all been influenced by officials who were prioritizing personal profit over imperial interests. The revelation was devastating. It meant that the Empire's recent military struggles, including the war with humanity, might have been partly caused by internal sabotage. Ships that weren't properly equipped, supply lines that failed at critical moments, intelligence gaps that left forces vulnerable, all potentially explained by systematic corruption. Marcus, Zarathel said slowly, if we proceed with this investigation, we're not just challenging individual officials. We're threatening the stability of the entire government. I know, but the alternative is allowing the corruption to continue until it destroys the empire from within. Dr. Kim projected economic models showing potential future scenarios. If current trends continue, the empire's fiscal position will become unsustainable within 15 years. The stolen resources represent not just lost revenue, but damaged infrastructure and compromised military capabilities. What do you recommend? Marcus stood and moved to the tactical display showing the palace complex. We have two options. We can present our findings to your father privately and let him decide how to handle the situation. Or we can prepare for the possibility that some members of the council will attempt to suppress the investigation. Suppress it how? By eliminating the evidence, discrediting the investigators, or removing the people who pose a threat to their operations. The casual way Marcus discussed the possibility of assassination attempts sent a chill through Zarathel. She realized that her husband was thinking like a military commander facing a hostile force, not like a court official dealing with political opposition. You think they would actually try to kill us? I think people who have stolen millions of credits and held power for decades won't surrender easily when faced with exposure. We need to be prepared for escalation. As if summoned by their conversation, Zarathel's personal aide entered the war room with obvious urgency. Your Highness, Minister Kolvash requests an immediate private meeting with you. He says it concerns urgent matters of imperial security. Zarathel and Marcus exchanged glances. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Where does he want to meet? Marcus asked. His private office in the ministerial complex, Your Grace. Absolutely not, Marcus said firmly. If he wants to meet, it happens here in the palace with appropriate security measures. Marcus, he's been my father's advisor since before I was born. I can't treat him like a criminal suspect without evidence beyond financial records. Zarathel, those financial records prove he's stolen enough resources to fund a private army. Someone with that much to lose, and that many connections won't hesitate to take extreme measures. The aide looked between them uncertainly. Your Highness, what should I tell the minister? Zarathel made a decision that balanced her husband's security concerns with the political realities of their situation. Tell Minister Kolvash that I'll meet with him in 1 hour in the formal reception chamber. Prince Marcus will attend as my advisor, and palace security will be present. After the aide departed, Marcus turned to her with obvious concern. That's still more risk than I prefer. It's the minimum risk we can accept while maintaining the fiction that this is a normal political meeting. If we treat him like a criminal, he'll know we've uncovered his activities. He probably already knows. People with his level of access have sources throughout the government. Dr. Kim looked up from her analysis workstation. Actually, that brings up an important point. If Minister Kolvash has been monitoring our investigation, he knows exactly what evidence we've gathered, which means he's coming here to either negotiate or neutralize the threat we represent. Marcus concluded. Zarathel felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. For the first time since their marriage, she was making decisions that could determine not just their personal fate, but the future direction of the empire itself. Dr. Kim, I want all our evidence backed up and transmitted to secure locations outside the palace. If something happens to us, the investigation needs to continue. Already done, Your Highness. Copies of everything have been sent to the human diplomatic mission and to loyalist military commanders in 3 different sectors. Marcus looked surprised. When did you arrange that? 2 weeks ago, when the scope of the corruption first became clear. I've been planning for contingencies since the beginning of this investigation. Zarathel realized that her husband had been thinking several steps ahead throughout the entire process. What she had seen as a financial investigation, he had approached as a military operation against hostile forces. What other contingencies have you prepared? Marcus activated a tactical overlay showing the palace complex and surrounding areas. Security teams loyal to your father rather than the ministerial bureaucracy. Communication systems that bypass standard imperial networks. And emergency extraction protocols in case we need to relocate quickly. You've been planning for civil war. I've been planning for the possibility that exposing this level of corruption might trigger violent reactions from the people involved. The difference between political opposition and armed rebellion is usually just a matter of timing. The hour passed quickly as they reviewed their evidence one final time and coordinated with palace security. When Minister Colvash arrived for their meeting, Zarathel was struck by how normal he appeared. The elderly Keth Moran, who had been like family to her, showed no signs of the stress that should have accompanied someone facing exposure for massive criminal activity. Princess Zarathel, Colvash said warmly as he entered the reception chamber. And Prince Marcus, thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice. Minister Colvash, Zarathel replied formally. You mentioned urgent matters of imperial security. Indeed, Colvash activated a portable data display. I become aware of certain irregularities in the colonial administration that require immediate attention. Marcus leaned forward slightly. What kind of irregularities? Financial discrepancies that suggest systematic embezzlement by local officials. I believe your investigation has uncovered similar evidence. The casual acknowledgement of their investigation confirmed Marcus's suspicion that Colvash had been monitoring their activities. Zarathel felt her scales shift to a defensive pattern as she realized they were in more danger than she had anticipated. Minister, she said carefully, what do you propose we do about these irregularities? I recommend transferring oversight of the colonial investigation to the Ministerial Council, where it can be handled with appropriate discretion. Some of the evidence you've uncovered could be misinterpreted if it became public without proper context. Misinterpreted how? Marcus asked. Colvash's expression hardened slightly. Prince Marcus, you come from a different political culture. You may not understand the delicate balance required to maintain stability in an empire this size. Sometimes the pursuit of absolute justice must be tempered by practical concerns, such as protecting corrupt officials from prosecution, such as preventing the collapse of governmental systems that millions of citizens depend on for their survival. Zarathel saw the trap that Colvash was setting. By framing the investigation as a threat to imperial stability, he was attempting to force them to choose between justice and loyalty to the empire. Minister, she said, the evidence we've uncovered suggests that the threat to imperial stability comes from the corruption itself, not from exposing it. My dear Zarathel, I've served this empire for 43 years. I've seen what happens when political investigations spiral out of control. The pursuit of perfect justice often destroys the very institutions it's meant to protect. Marcus stood and moved to face Colvash directly. Minister, are you suggesting that we should ignore systematic theft of imperial resources? I'm suggesting that there are ways to address these problems without destroying the careers and reputations of dedicated public servants who may have made errors in judgment. Errors in judgment? Marcus's voice carried a dangerous edge. Minister, we're talking about the theft of resources that could have funded medical care for thousands of colonists. People died because supplies were diverted to private accounts. That's a very dramatic interpretation of what are essentially accounting irregularities. The casual dismissal of colonial suffering seemed to trigger something in Marcus. Zarathel watched as his expression shifted from diplomatic courtesy to something much more dangerous. Minister Colvash, Marcus said quietly, I want to make sure I understand your position. You're aware of massive corruption throughout the colonial administration, but you believe it should be handled quietly to avoid political embarrassment. I believe it should be handled with wisdom and restraint. And the colonists who died due to diverted medical supplies? How should their families be handled with wisdom and restraint? Prince Marcus, you're allowing emotion to cloud your judgment. These are complex political matters that require experienced oversight. Marcus was silent for a long moment, and Zarathel could practically see him making calculations behind his eyes. When he spoke again, his tone was perfectly calm. Minister, thank you for sharing your perspective. Princess Zarathel, and I will certainly consider your recommendations as we proceed with our investigation. Kolvash looked satisfied. I'm glad we could reach an understanding. I'll inform the Emperor that you're approaching this matter with appropriate caution. Please do. I'm sure he'll be interested in all aspects of the situation. After Kolvash departed, Zarathel turned to Marcus with confusion. Why'd you back down? A minute ago, you looked ready to arrest him on the spot. Because arresting him wouldn't solve our real problem. Kolvash isn't just a corrupt official. He's a symptom of a much larger issue within the imperial government. What issue? Marcus reactivated their tactical displays. The people involved in this corruption network didn't act alone, and they didn't act in secret. They've been operating openly for decades because the system allowed it. Arresting individuals won't change the underlying conditions that made the corruption possible. Then what will? We need to change the system itself. But first, we need to survive the next few hours. What do you mean? Marcus pointed to the communication logs scrolling across one of his displays. Kolvash has been in contact with 12 different ministerial offices since leaving our meeting. He's also sent priority communications to the colonial governors who haven't been arrested yet. He's warning his network. He's activating his network. Zarathel, we have maybe 6 hours before they make their move to suppress this investigation permanently. What kind of move? The kind that eliminates inconvenient witnesses and destroys inconvenient evidence. Zarathel felt the full weight of their situation settling over her. They had started an investigation into colonial corruption and discovered a conspiracy that threatened the foundation of imperial government. Now they faced the choice between retreating to political safety or pressing forward into open conflict with some of the most powerful people in the empire. Marcus, what do you recommend we do? Her husband's expression was grim but determined. We accelerate our timeline. Instead of building a perfect case over months, we present everything we have to your father immediately, tonight. And if he chooses to protect his advisors instead of pursuing justice, then we'll know where the Emperor's loyalties lie, and we'll plan accordingly. The casual way Marcus discussed the possibility of opposing the Emperor himself sent another chill through Zarathel. She realized that her husband wasn't just prepared to fight corruption. He was prepared to fight the entire imperial government, if necessary. The question was whether she was prepared to stand with him when that fight began. The emergency meeting with Emperor Vashtok took place in the secure conference chamber deep within the palace core, a room designed to withstand everything from electromagnetic interference to direct military assault. As Zarathel and Marcus presented their evidence of systematic corruption, she watched her father's expression shift from skepticism to anger to something approaching devastation. 43 years, the Emperor said quietly, staring at the financial networks displayed in the holographic projection. Kolvash has served at my side for 43 years, and throughout that time he's been systematically looting the Empire. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, the evidence suggests that Minister Kolvash wasn't working alone. The corruption network includes officials at every level of government. Emperor Vashtok studied the network analysis with the attention he usually reserved for military intelligence briefings. Show me the military connections. Marcus activated a new display highlighting the defense procurement corruption. Defense contracts inflated by an average of 30%, with the excess funds diverted to private accounts. Substandard equipment shipped to frontline units, while quality materials were sold to civilian contractors. This explains the equipment failures during the war with your people, the Emperor realized. Weapons that malfunctioned, armor that failed, supply lines that collapsed at critical moments. The corruption undermined the Empire's military effectiveness for decades, Your Majesty. Some of our tactical victories weren't due to superior human strategy. They were possible because Kethmoran forces were equipped with inferior materials. Zarathel watched her father process the implications of Marcus's statement. The war that had cost millions of lives and nearly destroyed both civilizations had been prolonged and intensified by internal sabotage. How many officials are involved? The emperor asked. Our investigation has identified 47 individuals in positions of significant authority, Dr. Kim reported from her workstation. The network extends from colonial governors to ministerial staff to senior military procurement officers. And their response to your investigation? Marcus activated a tactical display showing recent communications traffic. Minister Cole Vash has been coordinating a response since his meeting with us this afternoon. Based on the communication patterns, we believe they're planning to either discredit our evidence or eliminate the people who gathered it. Eliminate? Your Majesty, people who have stolen resources worth millions of credits won't hesitate to use violence to protect their operations. We've identified suspicious activities around the palace complex that suggest preparation for either an assault or an extraction operation. Emperor Vashtok was quiet for several minutes, studying the displays with the careful attention of someone making a decision that would shape the future of his empire. Finally, he looked directly at Marcus. Prince Marcus, what do you recommend? Immediate arrest of all identified conspirators, seizure of their assets, and complete restructuring of the affected governmental departments. The corruption is too extensive for gradual reform. It requires decisive action. And if such action triggers political instability, Your Majesty, the corruption itself is already causing instability. The Outer Rim colonies came within hours of declaring independence. Other sectors are showing signs of similar unrest. The choice isn't between stability and instability. It's between controlled reform and chaotic collapse. Zarathel saw her father weighing the options with the experience of someone who had ruled a galactic empire for 30 years. She also saw something she had never seen before: uncertainty about the loyalty of the people closest to him. Zarathel, the Emperor said, what is your assessment of the situation? Father, I believe Marcus is correct about the scope of the threat. But I also believe we have an opportunity to transform the Empire into something stronger and more just than it's ever been. Explain. The corruption network represents the old way of governing, using imperial resources for personal benefit while ignoring the needs of ordinary citizens. If we eliminate it decisively, we can build new systems based on accountability and transparency. You're describing a fundamental change in how the Empire operates. Yes, I am. And I think that change is inevitable. The question is whether we lead it or whether it happens despite us. Emperor Vashtok stood and walked to the chamber's viewport, looking out over the capital city. For 43 years, I trusted Cole Vash's advice on every major decision. Trade policy, military strategy, colonial administration, all influenced by someone who was prioritizing personal profit over imperial interests. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, the corruption isn't a reflection of your leadership. It's a reflection of systems that allowed accountability to be subverted by personal relationships. You're suggesting that my trust in longtime advisors was a weakness. I'm suggesting that any system of government that depends on personal trust instead of institutional oversight will eventually be corrupted. The solution isn't better people, it's better systems. Zarathel realized that Marcus was offering her father something more than justice for past crimes. He was offering a path toward transforming the Empire into something that could survive and thrive for centuries. What kind of systems? The Emperor asked. Marcus activated displays showing governmental structures from various human societies. Separation of powers, independent oversight agencies, transparent budgeting processes, regular rotation of key positions, and direct accountability to the populations being governed. You're describing the human approach to government. I'm describing principles that have been proven to work across multiple species and political systems. The specific implementation would need to be adapted to Keth-Moran culture and needs. And you believe these changes are necessary for imperial survival. Your Majesty, the Empire has survived for centuries because it was stronger than its enemies. But corruption has been weakening it from within, while external challenges have been growing stronger. Without reform, the Empire will eventually be destroyed either by internal collapse or external conquest. The emperor turned back to face them. And if I choose to implement these reforms, what resistance should I expect? Immediate and violent opposition from the corrupt officials, Marcus replied. Political resistance from noble families whose wealth depends on the current system. And skepticism from ordinary citizens who have learned not to trust governmental promises. But you believe the reforms will ultimately succeed? I believe they're the only path to long-term stability and prosperity. Emperor Vashtok was quiet for another long moment before activating his personal communication system. General Mordak, report to the secure conference chamber immediately. Bring a full security detail. As they waited for the general to arrive, Zarathel found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since her marriage to Marcus. 6 months ago, she had been a princess whose primary concerns were diplomatic ceremonies and cultural events. Now she was helping to plan the most comprehensive governmental reform in imperial history. General Mordak arrived with 6 elite guards, all wearing the full battle armor reserved for protecting the imperial family during crisis situations. Your Majesty, Mordak said, studying the displays with obvious interest. What is the situation? General, we have uncovered evidence of systematic corruption throughout the imperial government. Prince Marcus and Princess Zarathel have identified a network of officials who have been stealing resources and undermining imperial policy for decades. Mordak examined the financial networks with the attention of someone accustomed to analyzing enemy force structures. The scale is extraordinary, Your Majesty. How do you wish to proceed? I want immediate arrest warrants issued for all identified conspirators. Full security details assigned to protect the investigation team. And preparation for potential civil unrest when news of the arrests becomes public. Your Majesty, some of the individuals on this list are among the most powerful nobles in the empire. Arresting them will trigger significant political opposition. Understand, General, but allowing them to continue their activities will trigger the collapse of the empire itself. Mordak studied the tactical displays showing suspicious activities around the palace. Prince Marcus, do you believe the conspirators are planning immediate action against the investigation? I believe they're planning to either eliminate the evidence or eliminate the people who gathered it. Based on communication intercepts, they have approximately 4 hours to act before we present our findings to the full Imperial Council. Then, we need to move faster than their timeline allows. The general activated his command interface. I'll coordinate the arrest to occur simultaneously across all affected locations. It will require mobilizing security forces throughout the empire. Do it, the Emperor commanded. And, General, make it clear to all unit commanders that these arrests have my personal authorization. Anyone who resists or attempts to warn the suspects will be considered complicit in their crimes. As Mordak began issuing orders, Emperor Vashtok turned to Marcus with an expression of grim appreciation. Prince Marcus, 6 months ago, you married my daughter as part of a peace treaty. Tonight, you may have saved my empire from internal collapse. Your Majesty, I just provided analysis of information that was already available. The credit belongs to Princess Zarathel for having the courage to pursue justice despite the political risks. Zarathel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Throughout the investigation, Marcus had consistently supported her decisions while providing the expertise needed to navigate complex challenges. Father, she said, there's something else we need to discuss. The reforms Marcus described will require someone to oversee their implementation. Someone with the authority to make fundamental changes, but without personal connections to the existing power structure. You're suggesting that Prince Marcus should lead the reform process. I'm suggesting that he's the logical choice. He understands both the problems and the solutions. He has no financial interests in maintaining the status quo, and he's already proven his commitment to imperial welfare. Emperor Vashtok studied Marcus with the careful attention he usually reserved for potential military commanders. Prince Marcus, would you be willing to accept responsibility for restructuring imperial government? Your Majesty, I would be honored to serve the empire in whatever capacity you deem appropriate. The position I'm considering would make you one of the most powerful individuals in the Empire. It would also make you a target for everyone who profits from the current system. I understand the risks, Your Majesty, and you're prepared to face them? Marcus's expression was calm, but determined. Your Majesty, I've spent my adult life fighting for causes I believe in. Transforming the Empire into something worthy of its citizens is a cause worth any personal risk. The Emperor looked between Marcus and Zarathel with obvious pride. Very well. When this crisis is resolved, I'll create a new position, Imperial Reform Administrator, with authority to restructure any governmental department necessary for eliminating corruption and improving efficiency. Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace complex. General Mordak received priority communications on his command interface. Your Majesty, he reported grimly, we have a problem. The arrests are proceeding as planned, but our security sensors have detected unauthorized armed forces approaching the palace complex. How many? Approximately 200 individuals in military equipment. They appear to be private security forces rather than imperial military units. Marcus immediately moved to the tactical displays. They're moving too quickly for this to be a spontaneous response. This operation was planned before our meeting with Kolvash, which means the corruption network was prepared for the possibility of exposure, Zarathel realized. And they're willing to use force against the imperial family to protect their operations, the Emperor concluded. General Mordak was coordinating defensive positions through his communication system. Palace security is mobilizing, Your Majesty, but we're facing a significant force with military-grade equipment. Marcus studied the tactical situation with obvious familiarity. General, what's the response time for loyal military units? 15 minutes for the nearest garrison, 30 minutes for the Palace Guard reserves. And how long can palace security hold against a determined assault? Against 200 attackers with military equipment? Maybe 10 minutes. The mathematics were stark. The corruption network had assembled enough force to potentially overwhelm palace defenses before help could arrive. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, I need you to authorize emergency military protocols. What kind of protocols? The kind designed for defending the Empire against enemies who are willing to attack the imperial family directly. Emperor Vashtok looked at his daughter and her husband, seeing in them the future of the Empire he had spent his life building. Authorized. General Mordak, implement whatever defensive measures Prince Marcus recommends. Marcus's expression shifted into something Zarathel had never seen before. The focused intensity of a military commander facing a life-or-death situation. General, Marcus said, his voice carrying absolute authority, we're not just defending a building. We're defending the future of the Empire itself. These people chose to attack the imperial family rather than face justice for their crimes. Let's show them why that was a mistake. As sirens continued to wail and tactical displays showed enemy forces converging on the palace, Zarathel realized that her husband was about to demonstrate capabilities that went far beyond financial analysis and governmental reform. The mild-mannered human who had married her for diplomatic reasons was about to become something much more dangerous. The real war was just beginning. The transformation in Marcus Chun was immediate and absolute. The diplomatic observer who had spent months learning Kethmoran customs disappeared, replaced by something that made even General Mordak step back unconsciously. Zarathel watched her husband move to the tactical displays with the fluid precision of a predator selecting targets. General, Marcus said, his voice carrying the tone of command that had won impossible victories during the Human Kithmoran War, show me every defensive system this palace has. Automated weapons, shield generators, communication jammers, emergency barriers, everything. Murdoko osativoted comprehensive schematics. Palace defenses include 47 automated plasma turrets, multi-layered energy shields, internal bulkhead systems that can compartmentalize sections of the complex, and emergency lockdown protocols. Marcus studied the displays with terrifying efficiency. What about the attacker's equipment? Military-grade personal armor, portable shield generators, heavy weapons capable of breaching standard defensive barriers. Standard barriers won't be sufficient. Marcus's fingers moved across the control interface with obvious familiarity. General, I need you to reroute power from non-essential systems to the defensive grid. Emergency lighting only, environmental systems to minimum, all available power to weapons and shields. That will leave most of the palace in darkness. Darkness favors defenders who know the terrain. How many security personnel do we have immediately available? 68 palace guards, 24 members of the Imperial Protection Detail, and 16 security technicians. Marcus was silent for a moment, calculating odds with the precision of someone who had spent years turning desperate situations into victories. Not enough for conventional defense. We need to change the nature of the engagement. What do you mean? Emperor Vashtok asked. Marcus turned from the displays to face them directly. Your Majesty, the attacking force expects to face standard palace security, guards posted at checkpoints, defensive positions at obvious locations, predictable response patterns. If we give them what they expect, they'll overwhelm us through superior numbers and equipment. And if we don't give them what they expect, then we turn their advantages into disadvantages. Marcus activated building schematics, showing the palace's internal structure. This complex was built as a fortress, but it's been modified over centuries to serve as a residence. The original defensive features are still present. They're just hidden. General Mordak leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of defensive features? Marcus highlighted sections of the building that had been overlooked during routine renovations. Concealed weapon emplacements, emergency command centers, hidden passages that allow defenders to move unseen, and compartmentalization systems that can trap attackers in designated kill zones. You've studied our architectural history? Zarathel asked with amazement. I've studied everything about this empire, princess. Military doctrine, governmental structure, technological capabilities, cultural traditions, and architectural design. When humans are surrounded by potential enemies, we learn everything we can about our environment. The casual mention of being surrounded by enemies sent a chill through the assembled group. Marcus had been living among them for months, apparently as an ally, while maintaining the mindset of someone in hostile territory. Marcus, Zarathel said quietly, "Do you consider us enemies?" He turned to look at her, and for a moment his expression softened. No, Sarated. But 6 months ago I wasn't sure. So I prepared for multiple contingencies. Alarms continued, sounding as the attacking force moved closer to the palace perimeter. Marcus returned his attention to the tactical situation with renewed focus. General, I need immediate access to the original palace defense systems. The attackers will have studied current security arrangements, but they won't know about systems that have been inactive for decades. Mordak activated authorization sequences that hadn't been used since the palace's construction. Defensive systems coming online, Prince Marcus. What are your orders? First, we evacuate the Emperor to the deepest secure location. This attack is designed to eliminate Imperial leadership, so keeping His Majesty safe is the primary objective. I'm not hiding while my palace is under attack, Emperor Vashtok declared. Marcus fixed the Emperor with a stare that somehow conveyed both respect and absolute determination. Your Majesty, with respect, you're not just defending your palace. You're defending the Empire itself. If you're killed or captured, the corruption network wins regardless of whether we repel this attack. And what about you in Zarathel? We coordinate the defense from secondary command centers. If they eliminate us, you'll still be alive to continue the fight. Zarathel realized that Marcus was thinking in terms of acceptable losses and tactical priorities. He was willing to sacrifice himself to protect the Empire, and he was asking her father to make the same calculation. Father, she said, Marcus is right. The Empire needs you to survive this. Emperor Vashtok looked between his daughter and her husband, seeing the resolve in both their expressions. Very well, but I want continuous communication from the command centers. Understood, Your Majesty. As Imperial guards escorted the Emperor to the secure bunker complex, Marcus turned to the assembled security personnel with an expression that made them instinctively straighten to attention. Listen carefully, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The attackers are expecting standard defensive tactics. We're going to give them something they've never encountered before. He activated displays showing the palace complex divided into tactical zones. Team leaders, assign your personnel to these positions. When the attack begins, you'll receive specific instructions through secure communication channels. Do not deviate from those instructions, do not attempt to improvise, and do not hesitate when targets are designated. General Mordak studied the tactical arrangement with obvious admiration. Prince Marcus, this is the most sophisticated defensive plan I've ever seen implemented in real time. General, this isn't just a defensive plan. This is a comprehensive military operation designed to eliminate an enemy force while protecting Imperial leadership. You're planning to destroy the entire attacking force. Marcus's expression was cold and calculating. These people chose to attack the